as embryos become more terrestrial, these are some things that happen. And actually, as I think about this, these apply both to synapsids and diapsids, the two very separate lineages there. So the sensory biology. I remember that our basic senses were laid down for aquatic living. They're laid down in fishes. Olfaction, sense of smell, gustation, the sense of taste. These are fish senses. Hearing. And as we move out of an aquatic medium, some of those structures get jerked around and modified for terrestrial use. Terrestrial hearing, different than fish hearing. Terrestrial smell, terrestrial taste, again. So it's the same basic body plan, it's just that we have modified them for terrestrial functioning. And then there's that big split from that ancestral amniote. And I can't emphasize this enough, two parallel lineages, the synapsid lineage and the diapsid lineage. Big split. They're trying to make sense of turtles here, like the synapsid lineage and the diapsid lineage. Oh, well, there's one more. There's the evolutionary tree we're going to be using. So, let's just real quick here. This is the synapsid lineage. These are animals on line towards mammals. And here I squished off it's backwards, it's not, fix that. There's the synapsid lineage, and there's ancient synapsid animals, mammals at the top. There's the diapsid lineage over here. Synapsids, diapsids. So, where I'm going with this is a very ancient separation. So synapsids have been evolving for terrestrial living, diapsids too, and in parallel to one another. And they've been in the same habitats, facing the same environments, and we sometimes see parallel developments. We see the synapsid lineage acquiring certain adaptations, and the diapsid lineage doing very similar things to deal with the same problems. So I thought of one that was worth touching upon here, and that's warm-bloodedness, or endothermy. Endothermy is when you control your body temperature internally. You use energy to control your body temperature. And there are two groups of organisms that are endothermic. We've got birds way over here, and mammals over here. And there's quite a bit of evolutionary separation between them. Birds and mammals aren't endothermic because their common ancestor invented it. Endothermy evolved over here and evolved separately over here. It was a solution to a problem. I was thinking about this, and I thought we'd touch upon it. There's a mammal and a bird. It's a wombat. It's adorable. So, mammals, birds. Let's look at that. In both groups, it probably starts with the same thing. Greater mobility. As amniotes diversified, both synapsids and diapsids, mobility became important and became more and more mobile. Faster, more agile, and moving more. So greater mobility triggers something, triggers adaptations involving a higher metabolism. If you're moving more, you have to generate more energy to support those muscles, so the metabolism becomes higher. That triggers changes in systems like respiration and circulation, but that's another story. Better respiration, better circulation, food. These are all parallel systems that as our metabolism increases, we see alterations here. Better circulation, better respiration. We're eating higher calorie food, or the food we're eating we're processing more efficiently, or capturing it more efficiently. All these things play back to higher metabolism, which plays back to greater mobility. One of the side aspects of higher metabolism is more heat generation. Those muscles burning generate heat. So much heat, you can generate so much heat that it's unhealthy and your body stops working. So we see systems to eliminate that waste heat. It's a waste, let's get rid of it. And here's an early synapsid, dimetrodon. And one of the thoughts behind this big sail here is that was a thermoregulator. He could pump blood through there and radiate that excess heat into the environment to cool himself off. Another idea is that in the morning, when it's cold out, he could stand with that sail facing the sun and warm himself up. Works probably both ways. But we generate more heat, we need to start eliminating it. It can become unhealthy. But the heat was expensive to generate. What about if we use it instead of just dumping it in the environment? What if we start using that heat? And that's probably the origin of endothermy. The heat is generated, and instead of throwing it away as a waste, we conserve it. And we use it to elevate our body temperature to a constant level, and our biochemistry adjusts to that level. And that's where we're at endothermy. And so in two lineages of animals, we end up with endothermy. And it seems logical that in both those lineages, things leading to mammals and things leading to birds, we went through these steps. Anyway, it's my hypothesis. I can get a Nobel Prize for it.
So endothermy was two separate evolution events?
Endothermy was two separate evolutionary events.
Okay.
Happened in the ancestors going to birds, happened in the lineage going to mammals. Yeah. So, parallel evolution. In other words, that's convergent evolution. Similar adaptation acquired by two different lineages. So. Yeah, and there's a proto-bird, and that's a proto-mammal. Batteries are running low on this. So again, in that random things we could talk about as the amniotes evolve. One of them is diet, and mentioned that a minute ago. But as we become more active, maybe grazing on leaves or pine needles isn't going to do it for us anymore, and we see development of dietary niches, different dietary niches, particularly carnivory, which is high energy food. So, there's I'm trying to remember why I put this slide other than it's just a cool slide. Respiration. As we become more active, we need to harvest more oxygen because we're burning more oxygen. And so the respiratory systems increase their efficiency. And this is a mammal lung. This is a bird lung. They're similar in a lot of ways and have lots of little pockets, lots of surface area to collect the gas. But birds and mammals came to a similar lung two different ways. We start with a very open lung, an amphibian lung, or a lungfish lung, and we see development of all sorts of tiny little passageways and pockets so you get as much surface area as you can get out of it. Anyway, birds and mammals do it differently. Bird lungs, I've sat down and tried to figure out how birds breathe a bunch of times. I will do it again before I talk about it. Can't figure it out. I watched the YouTube video on it. Birds have this respiratory system where air flows through their lungs in one direction. And but they're still doing this. They have a system of pipes and air sacs that are associated with their lungs. The air flows through them in one direction. So they harvest oxygen with enormous efficiency. Your lung goes in and out, right? Yeah. I will try to figure it out again. And then there's circulatory system. We could spend a whole semester on the circulatory system. I'm going to spend a slide on it. But this is the heart. These are the lungs. If you want to interpret this, and as we go from breathing like this to breathing like this or breathing like this, we see the circulatory system jerked around from a very simple fish-like one, amphibian-like one, to what birds, reptiles, and mammals do. And I'm going to leave that to an anatomy class. Some of you had anatomy, right? Yeah. Okay. So, let's kill that. That's enough general theoretical stuff. Let's look at actual animals for a while. All right, there's our familiar evolutionary tree. And I've highlighted what we're going to now call non-avian reptiles. That's this chapter here, so I've highlighted all the reptiles. This chapter is on non-avian reptiles, and that's all the reptiles in the traditional sense. It's reptiles minus birds. We're comfortable with the idea now that birds are well within this reptile radiation, but they're so different, and we have, thousands of years of tradition of reptiles and birds are different things, that we have different chapters in your book. We have a bird chapter, avian reptiles, and these are the non-avian reptiles, which I think we can get all around that by focusing less on this word reptile and just calling these things diapsids. The diapsids are all the things we call reptiles, all their ancestors, and birds, and that's diapsids. So there's the amniotes again. And let's just, we'll eliminate the synapsids for us to see synapsid here, the mammals. We'll get rid of them for a while. And just focus on the diapsids. And I'm going to start using that instead of reptile. And again, these are the living ones. And these, again, all things you know, except maybe Tuataurus. I'll show you in a few minutes because I think they're cool. This is from another edition of the textbook. Just showing you another way to look at it. We've got all these things, and these are things you know. Look at turtles. I'm not sure where to put turtles. Parareptiles, that means really primitive reptiles. Crocodilians, that's alligators and crocodiles. Pterosaurs, that's the dinosaurs that flew. Dinosaurs in the strict sense. Birds. These are aquatic Mesozoic reptiles. Squamexes, lizards. So there's an evolutionary tree. We call all these things reptiles or diapsids. Oh yeah, this one's taking turtles out, isn't it? Yeah, that's okay. So, another evolutionary tree here. These are useful. I put them in here. They're from different textbooks. You can put your finger on them, move them around. They're still trying to figure out what to do with damn turtles. But, again, stuff you're familiar with, and fossil and living stuff there. Okay, this is the one we know. So, there we just did that. Calling on amniotes. So that ancestral amniote, it's a whole day what I'm doing now, what I just did. This is kind of weird in the summer, everything's jammed together. So we just done this up review at the beginning of the chapter. So this ancestral amniote gives rise to all this cool stuff here. So I just did this. Paleozoic is the age of reptiles and amphibians. I'm sorry, age of amphibians and fishes. Mesozoic, age of amniotes. So, Mesozoic. Did that. The amniotes, particularly the diapsids, really diversified in the Mesozoic. Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, right in there. The study of reptiles is called herpetology. It usually also includes the study of amphibians. They're lumped together in one textbook in one class. We touched on that earlier. If we look at our evolutionary tree, we look for the synapomorphies. Right? What defines the whole group? The whole group Diapsida. One thing is the keratin is laid down in a particular form. It's called beta carotene or beta keratin. And the structure, I'm not so worried about that other than that it's a character that exists and we can point to. The keratin is laid down in these sheets called beta sheets. And that's a diapsid thing. And then the other thing is the skull, the diapsid skull, shown here in its very primitive manifestation with the two openings. Classic diapsid skull. If we look at diapsids, living and fossil, here's some creatures that we're going to play with. We've got a whole chapter for these silly things. And I'm putting together some discussion of these things here, the dinosaurs, which we'll do. I don't know if we'll get to them today, but we'll work on that. If we focus on the diapsids, we can break them down into different groups. We have the damn turtles again. We got a crowd called lepidosaurs. That means scale lizard. And that's lizards and snakes. That's the lepidosaurs. Archosaurs, that means old lizard. Archosaurs are birds, Crocodilian, I can say this one more time. When I say crocodilian, I don't just mean crocodile. I mean crocodiles, alligators, caimans, that's the crocodilians. And then dinosaurs are archosaurs. And then there's things that don't really fit into either of those groups. I call those other. They're all only known from the fossil record. So there's our diapsid radiation in a nutshell. Let's start with turtles. Did that. This is the order Testines. And testudo is Latin for armor or shell. So when you see that in a biology word, you're thinking something that's armored or got a shell on it of some sort. The order Testudines is the turtles. And here they're an evolutionary tree here. They have a deep separation. They go way back in the fossil record, at least into the Triassic. And we're classifying those diapsids. There you go, turtles. Sometimes they're called colonia. The order is sometimes colonia. That's not a word I use. But let's look at some of this diversity. And then for any of these groups, we just do random aspects of their biology. You could spend weeks on any one of them. We don't have that much time. So, I'm sure some of you have had a pet turtle. You've certainly seen them. Interesting creatures. Typically, and this is more common, I've noticed, in Europeans, particularly English, than on our side of the ocean, a turtle is the aquatic version, and a tortoise is the land version. That's how those words are generally used. At least in the United States, the word turtle is a general term for all these things. But if you're talking to an English person, and I've been at naturalist museums, and they go, "Do you mean tortoise?" This is the terrestrial one. This is the aquatic one. And we don't use the words quite like that. We typically use the word turtle in the broad sense for all of these things. Tortoise, I think if I said tortoise, you would understand. We're talking about a terrestrial thing. And then there's another one that you don't hear very often outside the South, terrapin. That's an aquatic turtle. A freshwater turtle is a terrapin. And I used to hear that word when I was working in the South and the Midwest. If you said terrapin in California, you guys wouldn't have known what that thing was, you? That's not a familiar word, but those are how those words are used. Diversity, about 300 species. That's not a particularly large group, but it's not a tiny group either.
So all of them are apsids? Like they...
Yeah. And
a little a.
An apsid, little a. It's a descriptive word, not an evolutionary word. Yeah, they have the anapsid skull. So their ancestor, we think, well, I'll get that in a minute.
Yeah.
So where are they? They're marine, terrestrial, and semi-aquatic. They span the terrestrial types. They're the habitat types, I mean. Extreme specialization in anything, and turtles are a good example, makes the evolutionary relationship sometimes challenging to identify, at least using anatomy. And turtles have a lot of anatomical modifications into their niche of little armored box-like animal, and that has obscured their evolutionary relationships. And particularly, go back 10, 12 years ago in textbooks, turtles are always hanging off, not sure where they are. Are they anapsids down here, or are they weird diapsids? Different ways to think about it. We're considering them to be weird diapsids. That seems to be the consensus, at least as near as I can tell. But here is an evolutionary tree from an older general biology textbook, and look, diapsids start here. And there's things we normally say associated with diapsids, but anapsids lead to turtles. And that's an idea the anatomy suggests that, but careful analysis suggests turtles again are weird diapsids, and the anapsids went extinct. Here's a fossil turtle from the Triassic, a reconstruction, Odontocheiles. Cheiles is a Greek or Latin word meaning turtle. And when you see that in the biology word, you're probably talking about a turtle. What's odonto mean?
Teeth.
Teeth, yeah. Teeth turtle. These things probably start off as aquatic reptiles. And the early ones had a shelled ventral surface, probably to protect from predators. The dorsal surface wasn't shelled till later, but that's an early version of a turtle. And there's the skeleton of it. It's got the ventral shield, but not a dorsal shell. Odontocotyles. So, these are the synapomorphies. It's just how I think about biology, so we always have to meet the synapomorphies. And I put a few of them here. One, again, clear synapomorphy is the abandonment of the temporal fossae. Don't need them. And so, anapsid with a small a. Makes sense when I say that, right? It's not an animal we call an anapsida. It's anapsid with a small a. That's one of their traits. And as they specialized in their niche of being an armored little animal, they closed up those holes. And I'm just going to look at the... By the time we have Odontocotyles, they're already closed. The shell is unique. We don't have a shell like this anywhere else in any other animal. And it's made of what's called dermal bone. I haven't talked about the different kinds of bones, so don't worry about that. But there's two kinds of bones, dermal bone and internal bone. Dermal bone's usually near the skin. And their skeleton's made of dermal bone. Their shell is made of dermal bone. Now, if you look at a turtle skeleton, the reptile dissection lab has us dissect turtles, and that's why I don't do it. I don't feel like dissecting turtles, but the ribs are modified, the vertebrae are modified, and then the base plate is a unique series of bones. And I think if we had a quiz question, what unique anatomical feature do turtles have, and what does it suggest about their niche? I think you'd immediately think of the shell, right? It's what they armored themselves up, and a general trend in vertebrate evolution is more primitive things are heavily armored, and we lose armor as things get more advanced. Things go to mobility rather than to armor. And this is an example of something went the opposite way. There's a niche for a little armored reptile, turtles took it. The turtle is covered with scales or plates, and they're made of keratin. And if you ever see a turtle shell hiking around, see a turtle skeleton, you can see these keratinaceous plates. Or to have a live turtle in front of you. When you see it lying in the forest floor, they eventually flake off and rot away, and you're just left with the bone. Another simplification they've undergone is teeth are lost, and the jaws are coated in a beak made of keratin. It's very hard and fairly sharp. If you've been bitten by a turtle, they can do some damage. When you specialize like that, you lose breadth. You lose the ability to do different kinds of things, but you become really good at doing one thing. If you've ever had a backyard turtle, and you also have a garden, you'll know that they are really hard on cucumbers and tomatoes and strawberries. That's what that's for. It's for taking pieces out of soft things. The Triassic turtles did have teeth. Modern turtles don't. But they come from a toothed reptile, and that's Odontocotyles again, toothed turtle. Oh, I already made that point. Anapsid skull on a diapsid animal. But that's just a great shot of, it's not even a hint of those temporal fossae there. So random bits of turtle biology. Do this for any group, or we'll do it for each of them. Things that I think are interesting or worth pointing out. Sea turtles. These big, giant sea turtles, there's only 7 species of them. They live in oceans. They make long migrations. We'll come back and talk about them in terms of conservation a little bit. But that's a fairly small group of the whole. And they're by large part, the big turtles, right? There are some big land turtles, but another evolutionary trend or ecological trend, bigger stuff is often in water because water supports their body, their weight. There are quite a diversity of freshwater turtles as well. If you're in the Midwest or the Southeast in particular, any slow-moving piece of water, any pond or farm pond, it's going to have a variety of turtles in it. then there's land tortoises, which are adapted to terrestrial living. A box turtle is a great backyard pet, by the way. You just have to put little berries around the bottom of the fence so it can't crawl in the neighbor's yard. You'll have it for 30 years. You gotta eat your strawberries and your cucumbers in your garden. This is our desert tortoise, Gopherus. Lives out in the Mojave and the Sonoran Desert, and I think some pretty harsh deserts. There's a turtle making his living out there in that very harsh environment. This is a protected species. It's endangered in parts of its range. It's also protected because people pick them up as pets or shoot them or run their cars over them, things like that. Jerks out there in the desert with their motorcycles kill a lot of them. But that's one of our locals, and you can get on a list for a pet. There's you can't go in the wild and take one, but if some are confiscated from somebody or they're injured and they end up in a wildlife rehabilitation center, you can get yourself on a list and get one for your backyard. But you have to go through an application process, and they come look at your backyard and see if you're okay. But when animals are removed from the wild, they can't be taken back sometimes, and you can be on the list for 15 years before you get one sometimes. But like I said, kind of a nice way to have a little companion in your backyard. Endothermy, strictly speaking, is burning energy to keep yourself warm. You maintain a constant body temperature by by burning energy. And turtles represent an interesting halfway there. They're not burning energy to generate heat, but moving around they do generate heat and they do work to conserve it. But they do raise their body temperature, like a lot of reptiles do that aren't warm-blooded, not endothermic strictly. They do raise their body temperature, and they'll do things like sun themselves. Their biochemistry works better at a higher temperature. They're not wasting energy, not utilizing energy to get to that higher temperature, but they'll sit out in the sun and sun themselves to do it. So there's some gray area between strictly cold-blooded and warm-blooded. In turtles and a lot of reptiles, it's called behavioral thermal regulation. They can seek out warm habitats or seek out sitting in the sun. I was in the Midwest and the South doing research. It always angered me and also made me really sad. I did fish work, and we'd pull up on a swamp or a lake, a small lake or pond to do fish work. We were collecting fish. And we're driving a museum truck along a muddy road along like an oxbow lake or a marsh. And the turtles are all up on the cypress knobs. Those fallen cypress trees are covered with turtles. And you can see them, and you drive along, and as soon as you slow down and stop the truck, they all drop into the water. And it's because yahoos in that part of the country drive along shooting them off the logs from their cars. And the turtles figured it out pretty quickly. I think that's kind of sad. We're off topic. We tend to think mammals and birds are the complicated vertebrates with complicated social lives. But we see in these lower diapsids, we see all sorts of courtships, behaviors, and social interactions. We got territoriality in turtles. We've got courtship behaviors. These are those giant tortoises, male and female, discussing if they're going to mate or not. And then this is an aquatic turtle, and I think I found a video of it. Males get these really long fingernails, claws on their front legs, and they do a little courtship where he caresses the sides of her cheek to see if she's interested. I found the video.
That's weird.
Cheeks with his long claws. And she responds.
What do they do?
Oh, it went back.
It is 20 seconds.
And her cheeks with his long claws.
The little interaction there. If you had a pet, one of the little pet green turtles, if it ever grew up, this is what it would have been. Chrysamines picked up.
Oh. Did she not like that? She
Maybe
ran away.
Yeah, she may not have been ready. She may have been holding out for a bigger guy.
I don't know. He was kind of small.
Pardon?
The male turtle was
Yeah.
kind of small.
I'm sure you've seen nature documentaries on sea turtles and their reproduction. Just a little bit about that. Turtle, relative to terrestrial turtles, reproducing the snapping turtle. All turtles lay eggs, and for anything but exceptions, most of them bury their eggs on land, and then little turtlings come out. There are no turtles that I can think of that give parental care. I can't think of any example of that. The little turtlings are on their own once they hatch. And sea turtles have to lay their eggs on land. No amniote lays their eggs in water. So they spend most of their lives swimming around, mating, and how they mate we don't know, because it happens in the ocean and you never see it. And they make these migrations to special egg-laying habitats, and I'm sure you've seen this. They come ashore and dig a burrow and lay their eggs, and then the mother goes back into the water and never sees her babies again. This is the only time she comes ashore in her whole life, is to lay eggs. When the eggs hatch, that little rush to the ocean, she's on land. And when she comes up to lay eggs, periodically through her lifetime, she's on land. Males never come on land. They spend their whole life in water. Their whole contribution is mating. And then this agonizing effort is only done by the female. This is a choke point in their life cycle. These habitats are extremely important, and they have to be protected for this whole operation here. So if this is a guy, it's his last time on land. I'm going to make a point that popped out of my brain. Oh. Osmotic issues. We talked about osmotic issues earlier. And remember, these are amniotes. They're waterproof. Question?
Are they case selected or R?
I would say they're more R selected, but remember K and R are comparative. So compared to you, they're definitely R selected. But compared to a lot of fish, they're K selected. So I would say more on the R side of things. They make lots of babies and hope a few make it. Remember, you're watertight. Turtles are watertight, so they don't have the amniotic problem like a fish does with water diffusing in and out of their gills, but they do sometimes have osmotic issues, and a classic example would be these sea turtles. These are animals that in their entire life never see fresh water. They swim in seawater, they never see fresh water. So they have to get water, and they drink it, but they're drinking salt water. That becomes a problem. You can't do that, but these creatures have the adaptation to allow that to happen. And they drink the salt water, but they take an awful lot of salt. And those things are called turtle tears. She's not crying from exhaustion while she's laying her eggs. That's salt elimination. There's glands in the eye, or near the eye, that collect the salts from the blood and push them out in a sticky mucus. And so it looks like turtles are crying when they're on land, sea turtles. It's actually their salt elimination. And I spent a long time since I've read Alice in Wonderland, but doesn't the sea turtle cry? That's that little bit of biology. If you care for them well, turtles make good pets. Not a touchy-feely pet, but when I was a kid, you could get these at Sears, these little green turtles, and we all had them as pets when I was a kid. They're juveniles. They grow up into something like this, about this big. And I was down in Chinatown a couple years ago, and they're for sale in China. That's not legal. They're illegal to sell those little turtles now because of salmonella. Some little kid swallowed one, and this is going back when I was a kid. We were all really mad at him because this little kid swallowed a turtle and got salmonella, and then the rest of us couldn't have turtles anymore. And the one little jerk.
Why would he swallow a turtle?
Kids swallow everything. My brother once swallowed a whole bunch of little magnets and threw them up on the kitchen floor.
Oh, jeez. Well, at least he threw them up.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, everyone had one of these. It was a turtle bowl. And if your turtle could crawl out there, you'd put food in there. I haven't seen one of those in years. I looked at my picture. You seen these little green turtles?
Yeah.
They're not legal anymore. And they're juvenile, so, and they rarely get a chance to grow up into those as pets, so maybe just as well. I'm sure a lot of little turtles were sacrificed to
Mistreated.
this pet trade. Turtle conservation. As with almost anything that's interacting with humans these days, conservation issues are at the fore. With regard to sea turtles, damage we do to the oceans in general affects their food sources, affects how they live, but again, the choke point in their life cycle is that reproduction. And when you put a resort or a beachfront property or whatever, sometimes a beach they've been coming to for tens of thousands of years becomes dangerous for them now because there's jerks and, humans, and pets and raccoons and all sorts of things that weren't there before. A lot of turtle conservation is trying to educate people to handle things properly. It's doable in some parts of the world. It's less doable in Madagascar or Mozambique, places like that. Even Mexico, it's hard in some places. A lot of turtles migrate, make seasonal migrations, and in North America, there are very few places that aren't crisscrossed by highways and roads, and turtles have been migrating for hundreds of thousands of years. And in the Midwest, at least, if you've ever driven in the Midwest during migrating season, there's a lot of turtles on the road, tortoises, and sometimes it's hard to get very far very fast because when you're with me, we stop to move them across the road. And as we're stopping 3 times a mile to pick a tortoise up and get them to the other side of the road. I looked for a native Ventura County turtle or tortoise, and I found this one. I haven't seen any, but we do have an aquatic terrapin, as it were. I have to find some place to see. We also have some introduced ones. People have released their pets and things like that. But in a pond or a slow-moving stream, we should have these. I haven't seen them any down in the creek, but they're apparently here. Okay, that's it for turtles, tortoises, and terrapins. So that's anything else I can say about them that popped up in my brain. Any questions? Lepidosaurs, let's look at them. This means scaly lizard. Lepidosaur, scaly lizard. And here's some lepidosaurs. It's the snakes, it's things we call lizards, and it's this cool thing called a tuatara. So there's our evolutionary tree with some time on it. These are kind of smallish reptiles. You know, they have their evolutionary base, way back here, origin of dinosaur era. The big reptiles went extinct for the most part, and these are smallish ones crept through that extinction event. And here they are in our evolutionary tree, right over here, lepidosaurs. So, there's turtles, and there's birds and alligators. We'll get to them later. So, as always, we need some synapomorphies. What defines these guys? What suggests to us that they constitute one evolutionary lineage? And there's a few things we can look at that are worth mentioning. One is the cloaca. The cloaca is that slit, and look at it in your shark day. We'll get sharks out today, and sharks have cloaca. It's that slot in the body where the intestine dumps and the urogenital system. And in lepidosaurs, it's transverse. If you flip over a turtle or snake, their cloaca, and if you pry that open, it'd be a slot. The intestine would dump into there. Their urinary tract would dump into there. And if you look at this, an alligator, and all other amniotes and other animals with a cloaca, it's longitudinal. So that's an alligator there. There's a shark right there. So look at your sharks today. Oh, your lampreys had a cloaca too if you looked at it. The primitive vertebrate thing. We don't have them because we're mammals and we're cool. Lepidosaurs shed their skin. This dead skin has to be shed, and lepidosaurs do it in one nice, neat piece. I don't know if you've been hiking out sometimes and you find a snake skin lying on the ground. We were talking about that when my daughter was reading Harry Potter, because the basilisk shed his skin in one piece in the Chamber of Secrets. You shed your skin all the time, but you do it like dust, little flakes. So there's lepidosauurs. There's the diversity of them. There are things you're familiar with and a few things you're not familiar with. Let's have a look. I keep watching the time here. We're running out of time. So the first thing we're running into is a pair of species. Only 2 species left in this group, and they look like lizards. But they're much, much more primitive than lizards. They're lepidosaurs. They're technically not lizards. They're called tuatara, and they're awesome. They look like big, goofy iguanas. Adults are about this big. This is a really, really primitive lepidosaur. This is a reptile that has its roots in the Triassic. It's a very ancient thing. There's only 2 species left. They're in the genus Sphenodon, and that's the 2 species there. And they're from New Zealand. Islands are time machines. Islands hold on to primitive stuff. And they used to be found on the mainland of New Zealand and all these little islands. These little spots are islands. When Europeans arrived, brought non-native animals like house cats and dogs and rats and mice and non-native plants. And tuatara lost most of their terrestrial habitat, mainland habitat, and they ended up on islands where they were preserved. One of them is only found on one island. So that's their range, and their conservation's been a big concern to the good folks of New Zealand the last 100 years. And lots of effort in that area, and captive breeding, and they're bringing these things back. But because of house cats and rats and mice, they don't have a lot of safe places on the mainland they can live anymore. So there's conservation. This is the super rare one. On this island here, there's about 300 of them in the wild. And they're all identified with little beads so that they can track them and monitor their behaviors and their statuses. If you were in New Zealand, this would be a cool graduate student project to get involved in one of these things. There's captive breeding. They're not that hard to breed, and to boost the numbers of a lot of endangered things, sometimes we bring a few into captivity and do captive breeding. And they've been successful at producing little tuataras. The problem is there's only so much habitat left for them. There's not many places on the mainland where they can safely live. So we can make them, we don't have a place to put them. And this is not a very good picture, but this little guy is one of the first naturally bred tuataras on the mainland in like 200 years. And that happened about 10 years ago, and they were so excited, the conservation biologists. When these kind of things happen, it's a success story. They get really excited, but that was just a sign they were on their way back. There's some kind of primitive features we see. We see these in some other reptiles, but they're worth pointing out here. The top of the brain, there's a structure called the pineal eye. And it's a light-sensitive organ. It's a vision thing, but it's not image forming. It detects light and dark. It detects the angle of the light, like in the summer the sun's up high and the winter's down low. Pineal eye gathers information like that, not so much images. And it's a primitive vertebrate trait, and you see it in some lizards and some snakes. You don't see it in mammals because we have this big, thick skull covering it up. And in mammals, the pineal eye, that structure gets repurposed, takes on a new function, and it's part of your pituitary gland, is that structure there. So evolution just repurposed something that's already there, but I just put that in there because it's a primitive vertebrate thing that you can sometimes see. It's the third eye, it's a weird thing. And there's that beautiful, relatively unmodified diapsid skull. This is a tuatara skull. Dorsal opening, ventral opening, and both arches are present. And I've got this in lab. We'll look at this, and I'm going to make everyone put their fingers in those 2 holes. So that's a peek into very old reptile anatomy. And this is the review there. There's a generic diapsid skull. There's those diapsid openings. And if we compare it to a lizard, a modern lizard, remember it's this bar that lizards have said we don't need that. Modern lizards, they have the upper bar, they don't have the lower one. This bar here. And if we compare it to a modern snake, I think something like, yeah, the snake doesn't have either of the bars. This bar, no, that arrow's misplaced. There you go. So anyway, there they are. If we were in New Zealand, we would take a field trip and go look at some in the wild. I think that'd be really kind of cool. haven't seen a live one. I don't know if they show up in zoos. It's not the kind of thing a zoo in the United States would get to it. Zoos like to get things that attract people. That's not going to attract many people except weird people like me. But I haven't also. I'm sure they're protected. I hasn't seen them in the pet trade. I don't know if you could get one, get a permit to get one. It'd be worth having a few at least so we could see them alive. Okay, so that's tuataras. The next group of animals are called the squamates, squamata. And squam means flat, like squamous epithelium means flat. And I assume that's referring to their scales. They're covered with flat scales, which isn't unique to them, but that's probably what the word was describing. So it's the order Squamata. And that's things we call snakes and things we call lizards, although those two groups are not as well separated as you might think they are. Talking, it should be 10,000, the Calvin's in the wrong place. 9 to 10,000 species of these things known.
So do a tuatara shed their skin in one piece as well?
I assume they do, because that's a trait down here.
Okay.
I don't know that for a fact, but I assume they do. Like I said, we need to go to New Zealand. A lot of places we need to go. All right. So there are two major divisions in the squamates. And this is where it gets a little bit dicey, because you think of lizards as things with 4 legs and snakes as things with no legs, right? Well, there are lizards with no legs, and there are things on the snake side of the equation that do have legs. So that separation is not as sharp evolutionarily as we like to think it is. Generally, we use the word lizard for animals with 4 legs and snake for animals without legs. But if you look at that, there are snakes, and snakes are a well-defined, highly specialized group, but some of their closest relatives are things we would have traditionally called lizards. The monitors, for example. The Komodo dragon is more closely related to snakes than it is to the rest of the lizards. Let's not put it that way. Than it is to lizards in the more refined sense. So snakes and monitors form a group, and the rest of the lizards form at least 1 or 2 separate groups. Got a little bit of confusion. Let's move on. So we need some synapomorphies. Oh gosh. We need some synapomorphies. Males have hemipenes. That's their copulatory organ. And they're usually paired. One comes out either side. You can mate from either side. And they're usually covered with big spines. I'm not sure how they work exactly, but I showed you that picture earlier, those lizards mating. They come up side to side, and sperm is transferred through that structure there. So whether you're a snake or a lizard, you have that. I've been in the field of people we were picking up snakes and identifying them. And some snakes, to identify them, you have to see the hemipene. So you have to have a male, and you have to hold this snake who's writhing and twisting, and you got to massage him there until he sticks it out. And then you can identify him. The jaw, or the skull, is what's called a kinetic skull. And there's a bunch of skull traits, and I summarized them down to this one phrase, a kinetic skull. And kinetic means things move, right? And in a lizard skull, we've got a lot of flexion points. Unlike a mammal skull where you only have one point of motion, lizards and snake skulls have multiple points of motion. A fish skull is kinetic too, but in a different way. So lizards in the strict sense, generally given the suborder Sauria, which is nice because that's the Greek word that means lizard. And the number that I found is about 6,000 species of lizards. And I'll bet a lot of you have had a pet lizard at one point right now. We'll just look at random bits of lizard biology. A lot of lizards, probably most lizards, are carnivorous. They're smallish animals for the most part. They're really good at arthropods. They're eating insects. They're eating spiders. Small animals like that. They're eating each other. Big lizards eat mice. And a little unexpected for a lot of people, but there are some herbivorous lizards out there. This is a native of the Sonoran Desert called a chuckwalla, and he feeds on flowers and plant shoots. Now, I should put a better picture of him in here. He's a big, fat lizard. They're about this big, fat thing. He's got a huge stomach. And he feeds on this, and you know this, right? Plant material is difficult to digest. well, let's not put it that way, more difficult to digest than an insect. So he's got this huge stomach, big fat body, and after he fills up on flowers, he stretches out on a warm rock and presses his belly into that warm rock. And that's a big digestion chamber there for that plant matter. A carnivore doesn't need that. An herbivore does. And here's the classic herbivorous lizard. On the Galapagos Islands, there's a lizard called the Galapagos iguana that's adapted to marine life. It's the only marine lizard. And they sun themselves on the rocks and the shores of the Galapagos. And then when they're hungry, they jump in that cold water and they swim down and they bite algae off the rocks. They got highly modified teeth for clipping algae off the rocks. They fill up and they go sit in the sun for a couple hours to digest. Only marine lizard. One unique thing lizards do is their tails can be broken off and then grow back. Well, you can break tail of anything, but in lizards it grows back. And that poor little guy, they probably did that just for the photograph. It's an anti-predator strategy. If a predator grabs the tail, he gets a handful of tail, and the animal runs away. And then the tail will regrow, but it will never look the same and never be quite as long. But it's you trade that for your life. Some lizards, when they lose their tail, they actually go back and look for it, and they'll eat it later. Yeah,
Do they feel the pain?
I'm sure they do. It can't be good.
They eat their tails?
They'll go back and try to find it. That's expensive. They store fat in there too. So if they lose it and they get away and it's safe, they'll wander back and try to find it and they'll eat it. Yeah.
So the vertebral column, I'm assuming, doesn't go the whole duration, or it'll be just like a little piece of it?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know all the details. I know that the vertebral column goes all the way to the tip originally.
Yeah.
I don't know about this. That's a good question. I don't know if the vertebrae regrow. I don't know that. But it never looks the same. It never gets as long. If you pick up a lizard that's regrown its tail, it's obvious. It looks like that. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Can it do that multiple times?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure they're not happy each time it happens. I just put some random lizard things in. This is a horny toad. It's not a toad, obviously. It's a lizard. I grew up calling them horny toads, so I'm still going to. The genus is Phrynosoma. You seen these? Anybody? These are little native lizards in New Mexico and Arizona, pretty in New Mexico where I grew up. These were not uncommon. We used to catch them. And it's New Mexico State reptile. They're kind of neat. And they were considered kind of, if you were a kid and you had one, you could probably sell it to another kid because they were kind of prized. And what they are, they're cool little armored things with lots of spikes on them. And they're ant specialists. Their principal food species, you can't feed them other things. If you have one in a terrarium, they starve to death unless you give them ants. They're ant specialists. Ants are not good food. They're mostly exoskeleton. They're toxic. So not a lot of things eat ants, but they specialize to do that. And it's that same thing I just described with the vegetarian lizard. They fill up their stomach with ants. The stomach is really big, and then they lie on a rock and press their belly into that warm rock to digest those ants. Now, here's something we've done. At some point last century, we introduced fire ants to the United States, accidentally, I assume. They're very destructive. They're very aggressive ants that sting. If you're from a southern state, you're experienced with fire ants. I have a friend who has a job in, I think, Baton Rouge, and he told me he spends $30 a month on fire ant control in his yard to make sure his dogs and kids are safe. So they become a tremendous problem, just a pest, and for agriculture. And this is their range now of these. I can't remember where they're from. Africa or South America, I can't remember. But they're very, very aggressive, and they sting, and $5 billion of economic damage to this country done a year. And you think, well, what's the cost of endangered species? There it is right there. There's 300 million Americans. Divide that into 5 billion, and that's how much each of us has taken out of our wallet each year to control this stuff. And that's not the only thing we have to deal with. So that's us. It's agricultural pests. They kill people. They kill pets. But horny toads can't eat them. And wherever fire ants appear, they tend to outcompete or destroy native ants. And so these things have been losing their range because, A, we destroy habitat, but also their food is disappearing. So everything's interlinked. And they're live bears, by the way. They bear their young alive. Little tiny horny toads come out of the moms. I had one when I was a kid, and I went to the terrarium one morning, and there were 32 baby horny toads in the terrarium, and a big fat mom. And they're about as big as dimes when they come out. They're adorable. They do something weird that I can't think of any other animal that does it. When they're threatened or stressed, the blood vessels in their eyes burst and blood shoots out of their eyes. I can't imagine what that's all about, but it's like, spraying it into the predator's face and startling the predator. I don't know. It's just a weird adaptation they have. So anyway, I don't like them. I guess you guys aren't familiar with them. There are native on Southern California, but I bet they're pretty rare now. And here's another little bit of convergent evolution. This is an Australian lizard, and there's a horny toad, a North American lizard. They're not closely related, but similar niche, similar adaptations have developed. I don't think he's an anteater, but he's got that anti-predator body to him with all the spines on him. If you look to old movies like from the 30s that have dinosaurs, they frequently glue little plastic fins on the back of horny toads and film them like dinosaurs. You'll see them. Okay, let's we're transitioning to snakes now. So let's take a quick break here. Another one. We're probably get farther today, but we're okay. There's 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll carry on. So put your pencils down and relax for a few minutes. Ooh.